Welcome back to Outlaw Operations. Tonight, we're about to dive into a story that's twisted, filled with deception and betrayal, a case where love, ambition, and greed collided, ultimately leaving behind a trail of tragedy. This case begins like so many others, a seemingly innocent attempt at reconciliation between two friends. But beneath the surface, a far darker plot was quietly unfolding. Arand, one of the key figures, had made her way to Annel's house, a tub of ice cream in hand and a smile plastered across her face. She claimed she wanted to make amends, to rebuild the friendship that had once meant so much. Annel, eager to forgive and forget, welcomed her in. They exchanged pleasantries, sharing a moment of peace, and Annel invited Arand upstairs to chat, just like they had done in the past. What started as a simple, nostalgic moment of friendship, however, quickly took a sinister turn. After a brief time talking and enjoying the ice cream, Arand suggested they watch a movie. She excused herself to use the bathroom, but instead of heading toward the restrooms, Arand made her way downstairs to the kitchen. There, she picked up a sharp knife, the cold steel a stark contrast to the warmth of their past friendship. She returned to the room, hiding the weapon beneath her clothes. Annel, unaware of the danger, was lying on the bed with her back to the door. It was the perfect opportunity. Arand moved swiftly, pulling out the knife, and without warning, she struck. Annel, stunned, tried to defend herself, but the attack was brutal, too fast for her to react. The blood was everywhere, and soon, Annel collapsed to the floor, lifeless, the victim of a senseless, horrific crime. In a panic, Arand knew she had to act fast. She needed to clean up before anyone returned. She wiped down every surface she could, using all the rags she could find. But it wasn't enough, the blood had soaked into the house, leaving traces that couldn't be erased. In the end, she gave up, only managing to clean part of it. She then went to the bathroom to wash her hands, trying to rid herself of the evidence. Afterward, she took some of Annel's clothes from the closet and put them on, hoping to disguise herself. With the deed done, Arand closed the bathroom door and left Annel's body behind. She left the house in haste, leaving the front door ajar, not even bothering to lock it. It wasn't long before the truth began to unravel, as Annel's family and friends realized that the story Arand had given them was a lie. They knew their loved one wasn't the person Arand had made her out to be. What followed was a swift investigation, and soon, Arand found herself in juvenile court. After a hearing that lasted over an hour, Arand was convicted. Though her crime was premeditated, the law, in its complex nature, classified her actions under juvenile law, sentencing her to 7 years in a detention center. To some, this felt like justice, but it was far from it. As the case moved through the courts, it became clear that things weren't as they seemed. There was outrage when the defense filed an appeal. The trial had been held in the wrong venue, and a higher court decided to reopen the case. Yet, despite the swift proceedings, the original verdict wasn't overturned. Public outrage reached a boiling point. Justice, many believed, had not been served. Protests began to flood social media, and petitions calling for a longer sentence were shared by millions. Still, after everything, Arand was sentenced to just 7 years. But then the system failed again. In July 2016, her sentence was reduced to 5 years, and the possibility of an early release for good behavior became a reality. This news sent shockwaves through the country, with journalists descending on the courthouse. As the story continued to unfold, it became a media frenzy, yet no one could have predicted what would happen next. In September 2017, just over 3 years after the crime, Arand was released. The court, citing reforms in the Juvenile Justice Act, deemed her eligible for release early. It was a decision that sparked even more outrage, particularly from Annel's family. Hugo, Annel's relative, couldn't contain his anger. He had watched the entire process unfold, and he couldn't help but feel that justice had been utterly forsaken. He expressed deep regret, lamenting the fact that legislative reform seemed to favor criminals over the victims. It was a painful realization that the system had failed, leaving Hugo with nothing but anger and sorrow for the loss of his loved one. This case would not be forgotten, and yet, as time passed, the story faded into the background, overshadowed by the passage of time and new headlines. But for those involved, it would never truly be over. The pain, the unanswered questions, and the sense of injustice lingered long after the courtrooms went quiet. Now, let's shift to another tale, a tragic story of broken dreams and betrayal. Dorothy Stratton, born in 1960 in Vancouver, never imagined that her life would take the turn it did. From a simple family background, she never dreamed of fame or fortune. She just wanted to live a quiet life, free from the burdens her family faced. But life had other plans. Dorothy started working at a local Dairy Queen at the age of 17. With her tall figure, blonde hair, and striking looks, she quickly became the object of attention, young men, wealthy businessmen, and others who saw her beauty as something to be coveted. It wasn't long before she caught the eye of Paul Snyder, a man who was 26 and well-connected in Vancouver's nightlife scene. Paul was captivated by Dorothy's charm, and before long, he made a bold move to win her over. He invited her out, bought her a red evening gown, and even convinced her to wear it to her high school prom. Their relationship quickly developed, despite the 9-year age gap. But behind Paul's smooth words and gifts, there was something darker. He saw Dorothy not just as a girlfriend, but as a means to elevate his own status. He pushed her into modeling and photo shoots, all the while manipulating her, bending her to his will. What started as a relationship based on attraction quickly spiraled into something much more toxic. Dorothy, unaware of the danger she was walking into, found herself caught in a web of control and deceit. Both of these stories, separate yet tied together by themes of manipulation, tragedy, and betrayal, remind us how fragile our lives can be when those we trust turn on us. The truth often takes a back seat to lies, and sometimes, even the strongest justice systems can falter under pressure. At first, she hesitated. The thought of standing in front of a camera, posing for strangers, it made Dorothy uncomfortable. She was young, small-town sweet, with big eyes full of dreams but no real direction. Modeling? It sounded risky, even shameful. But Paul had a way of speaking that made everything sound like destiny. He told her she had something special. Something people in Hollywood would kill for. And he wasn't just guessing, he was certain. He painted her a picture: money, fame, the spotlight. A life so far from waitressing for tips that it barely seemed real. He said she deserved it. That she belonged somewhere bigger, better. And little by little, his words worked on her. Dorothy agreed. Paul found a studio, hired a professional photographer, and made sure everything looked top-tier. He told Dorothy this was just the beginning. When the photo shoot was done, he picked out the best shots himself and mailed them directly to Playboy. It wasn't just ambition. It was obsession. The response was quick. Her photos made waves at the Playboy office. She had that girl-next-door allure, the kind that made her unforgettable. One of the editors reached out. They wanted to meet her. In Los Angeles. But there was a problem. Paul knew Dorothy's parents would never approve. She was only 19, and Playboy wasn't just any magazine, it was that magazine. So Paul forged her mother's signature on the release forms. Claimed she gave full consent. By summer 1979, the two of them were in Hollywood. Dorothy's transformation was fast. By August, she had become the Playmate of the Month. Soon, she was also working as a bunny at the Playboy Club. The lights were brighter now. People noticed her. Important people. But Dorothy wasn't used to it. Not the stares, not the pressure. She smiled when cameras flashed, but deep down she was overwhelmed. Wealthy men with smooth smiles and expensive suits hung around her like shadows. They said nice things, bought her gifts, touched her arm too long. She played along. She didn't want to upset anyone. Paul was always close by. Too close. He wasn't just her husband, he was her manager, her shadow, her decision-maker. He kept track of everything, her schedule, her meetings, her clothes, even the people she was allowed to talk to. Dorothy felt suffocated, like she couldn't move without Paul's permission. Still, when he proposed, she said yes. She told herself it was gratitude. Without Paul, she wouldn't be here. That's what he always said, and maybe it was true. Maybe she owed him. They got married in a small, quiet ceremony in Las Vegas. No fuss. No family. Just the two of them and the weight of all that had passed between them. Dorothy kept rising. Casting agents and directors started to notice her, not just for her looks, but for something real in her performances. She started getting roles. She made good money, enough to buy a beautiful home in Los Angeles. She and Paul moved in, and from the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. But behind closed doors, the cracks were spreading. Paul bragged to friends that everything Dorothy achieved was thanks to him. He watched her like a hawk, controlling her food, her wardrobe, her friends. He warned her to avoid certain people, unless they were rich, powerful, useful. If a man talked to her and Paul didn't like it, there'd be a scene later. Sometimes worse than a scene. Rumors started to swirl. People whispered about Dorothy and Hugh Hefner, the Playboy founder. Some said they were having an affair. Hefner denied it, insisted Dorothy was respectful, moral. But the whispers never really stopped. One day, Dorothy made a decision. Quietly, she hired a new manager. Someone professional. Someone not Paul. She began excluding her husband from meetings, shoots, events. She started giving excuses, making up stories about why he couldn't come along. Paul noticed. He didn't say much at first, but his mind was racing. He became paranoid. He hired a private investigator to follow her. But the PI didn't find anything suspicious, just a young woman trying to live her own life. Still, Paul grew more erratic. He set rules about what Dorothy could wear. Told her she couldn't act flirty in public. He demanded she stop spending time with men who didn't bring money into their lives. Dorothy started sleeping away from home more often. She confided in friends and coworkers. She was scared. Tired. Angry. Playboy staff told her to leave him. One day, Paul found out Dorothy had started a company under her own name. Her manager advised it. The legal paperwork ensured that if she ever divorced Paul, he wouldn't get a dime. That discovery pushed him over the edge. He stopped pretending. He stopped caring about appearances. While Dorothy worked, Paul stayed home, living off her income, sulking in silence. Friends saw less of him. When they did, he looked haunted. Then, in spring 1980, everything shifted. Dorothy went to a party at the Playboy Mansion. She met Peter Bogdanovich, a respected director, nearly twice her age. He was charming, soft-spoken, thoughtful. He made her laugh. He said she had something unique. He asked her to audition for a role in his next comedy. She said yes. On March 22, Dorothy flew alone to New York to start filming. She told Paul that no outsiders were allowed on set. It was a lie. She was terrified he'd show up and ruin everything. In New York, she bloomed. Away from Paul, away from the tension, she felt light again. Free. She and Peter grew close, too close. Soon, they were more than just co-stars. It was fast, passionate, real in a way Dorothy hadn't felt in years. She was happy. And that happiness, it terrified Paul. He knew she was slipping away. And he couldn't stand the thought of losing her. Not after everything he'd done to make her his. Not after he made her a star. She had someone new in her life now, someone powerful, someone wealthy, someone who made the world bend with a simple word. He was a director with connections that could turn a face into a legacy. And Dorothy? She didn't want to miss her shot. The distance between her and Paul grew wider each day. Cold silences replaced conversations. The warmth they once shared dissolved into something unfamiliar. For 2 long months, Dorothy was in New York, chasing dreams and wrapping herself in the glitter of opportunity. Paul stayed behind in their grand Los Angeles home, a space that echoed more with absence than life. He tried to fill the silence with other women, but each one left with a shake of the head. They couldn't understand how a man like Paul could betray someone like her, a woman who graced the pages of Playboy, a symbol of allure and perfection. When April came around, Dorothy returned to California for the Playboy Awards. She wasn't just attending, she was the main event. Model of the Year. Her face on the cover, her name in lights. With the title came gifts, a brand new Jaguar, $200,000 in prize money, and even more attention. Hugh Hefner took a particular interest in her. He saw something big, something lasting. And Dorothy leaned into that light. But her spotlight didn't stop in California. Next, a 2-week promotional tour across Canada. While she mingled with celebrities and industry giants, director Peter Bogdanovich became more than just a professional connection. She planned to spend her final tour days in Vancouver with her family, hoping for a brief return to normal. Paul caught wind of those plans and made his move. He knew the Vancouver scene, he'd managed clubs there, had friends in all the right and wrong places. When he showed up, he didn't come with open arms. He came with expectations. He pressured her into working at the clubs, took the money, called it business. Dorothy broke. Tearful, she confessed she was thinking of leaving everything behind, fame, modeling, even acting, if it meant saving their marriage. She just wanted to go back home with him and start again. Paul. He dismissed the idea entirely. Once the tour ended, she returned to New York, trying to disappear into her work. Calls to Paul became rare. When they did happen, she asked for space. Paul spiraled. He grew angry, obsessed. And then there was the girl, not even 18, but already being molded by Paul to be the next Playboy star. She looked the part, sure, but even Paul couldn't lie to himself. She would never be Dorothy. Then came June. Their first anniversary. Paul opened a letter that crushed him. Dorothy wanted a divorce. She was cutting him off, emotionally, financially. She didn't want to see him anymore, didn't want to be tied to him. Paul was certain now, she was cheating. Probably with Peter. He had to know for sure, so he hired a private investigator. The obsession deepened. One day, Paul called Dorothy's manager and threatened him, warned him that things might get ugly. The manager told Dorothy to stay away from Paul, to hire protection, to not go anywhere alone. She ignored the warnings. Without a green card or steady work, Paul was falling apart. He drained their joint bank account. Sold everything he could, jewelry, collectibles, even the Jaguar, cheap and in cash. Desperation left him hollow. He began renting out rooms in the house. Depression clung to him like a shadow. By mid-July, Dorothy had wrapped filming and whisked away with Peter to England for a 10-day vacation. When she returned, she didn't go back to her old house. She moved in with Peter, into a mansion in the hills of Bel Air. Paul was seething. On July 31st, Paul borrowed a gun. That night, he hid near Peter's mansion, waiting for someone, anyone, to show up. Hours passed. Nothing. Eventually, he gave up and drove to the mountains. Alone, surrounded by the dark, he thought about ending everything. But he couldn't. Not yet. A week later, on August 8th, he convinced Dorothy to meet him at the house. She came, but she wasn't the same. The fragile, unsure woman he once controlled was gone. She was sharp now. Poised. Unshaken by his pleas. She told him she was in love with someone else and wanted a divorce. Paul kept his cool. He asked her to return in a week so they could talk again, calmly, without pressure. The next day, Paul tried to buy a gun, but as a Canadian, he kept hitting legal roadblocks. He even asked his private investigator to buy one for him. The PI refused. Then Paul found an ad in the paper. An old 12-gauge shotgun for sale. He drove to the San Fernando Valley to buy it but got lost. 2 days later, on August 13th, he found the address and purchased it. Told the seller he wanted to go hunting. On August 14th, he told his roommate to leave. He needed privacy. Dorothy was coming. Her team begged her not to go alone. Offered to come with her. Said it wasn't safe. But Dorothy didn't believe he'd hurt her. She thought she knew him. She brought a large sum of cash. Not as a bribe. It was a thank you, for the past, for helping her get started, for once loving her in his own way. She didn't know she was walking into the end of her story. And Paul? He had already written the final chapter. Dorothy Stratton believed that despite everything that had happened, things could end peacefully. She still wanted to keep things friendly with Paul. That day, she scheduled a quick meeting with him. A photo shoot had been arranged for later in the evening, so she figured a noon visit wouldn't take too long. She made her way over to Paul's house, maybe a little anxious, but determined to keep things civil. Not long after she arrived, her phone rang. It was her manager doing a safety check. They had this system in place: if anything felt off, Dorothy was supposed to use a specific code. A little insurance against anything going wrong. But Dorothy picked up, stayed calm, and told her manager everything was okay. The call ended. But inside that house, things weren't okay. The conversation between Dorothy and Paul didn't stay calm for long. What started as civil began to unravel. Voices were raised. Tension filled the room. Old wounds reopened. And then, Paul snapped. In a flash of rage, he reached for a gun and shot Dorothy. A single shot. Right in the face. Just like that, her life was gone. After that, Paul unraveled completely. Whatever grip he had left on reality slipped. His behavior became erratic. He didn't call for help. He didn't try to explain. Hours passed in silence, until finally, he turned the gun on himself. By 8 p.m., Dorothy's roommates were back home. They noticed her car parked out front, nothing unusual. Inside, they found her handbag left in the living room. Seemed normal. Maybe she and Paul had made up. Maybe they were together again, back in the bedroom. Not wanting to interrupt, the roommates quietly went to their own rooms, giving them space. But Dorothy's manager was getting more and more worried. Repeated calls went unanswered. Something didn't feel right. Finally, around 11 p.m., the manager got in touch with one of the roommates. They spoke briefly, just enough to raise concern. The roommates decided to check the master bedroom. They opened the door. What they saw would stay with them forever. Dorothy and Paul were both dead. The autopsy later revealed the timeline. Dorothy had died about an hour after arriving at Paul's house. Paul took his own life about an hour after her death. News of Dorothy's death traveled fast. Hugh Hefner was one of the first to hear. He immediately called Dorothy's close friend, and rumored romantic partner, director Peter Bogdanovich. When Peter picked up the phone and heard what happened, he didn't say a word. He fainted. For days after, he was heavily sedated, unable to cope with the shock and grief. Playboy, unaware of the tragedy, had already sent the August issue to print. The cover featured Dorothy's smiling face. It hit newsstands before anyone could change it. For many, it felt eerie, her image on every shelf while headlines mourned her death. For the following annual issue, Playboy quietly replaced her image with another model. Peter Bogdanovich took it upon himself to organize and finance Dorothy's funeral. He was broken. His love for her was deep, and her sudden loss left a hole he could never fill. He chose to have her cremated. Her ashes were buried in a Los Angeles cemetery. Dorothy's final film, They All Laughed, had been completed before her death, but the studio decided against releasing it after the tragedy. Peter believed in the film, and in Dorothy's performance. He bought the rights himself, using his own money, and got it released in 1981. But the world wasn't ready. The film was barely noticed. Critics didn't praise it. Audiences didn't come. It failed financially and dragged Peter into bankruptcy. Years later, more controversy would surface. Rumors swirled about Peter and Dorothy's younger sister, Louise Stratton. She was just 13 when Dorothy died. The whispers were ugly. The Stratton family was furious and pushed back with legal threats. But then, in 1988, when Louise was 20 and Peter was 49, they got married. Louise later said their relationship didn't begin until she was 18, but the public had a hard time letting go of the image. Still, they remained together for 13 years. Eventually, they divorced in 2001. Peter never remarried. He poured himself into filmmaking and lived the rest of his life behind the camera. He passed away in 2022, at the age of 82. Louise moved back to her hometown of Vancouver and pursued a quiet career as an actress and director. She never forgot her sister. The shadow of Dorothy's life, and her death, never truly left her. Now, let's shift the scene, another city, another life, another tragedy. Yolanda Sillo was a 28-year-old single mother living in Miami, Florida. A gentle soul, focused on raising her daughter, far from the chaos of nightlife or distraction. She had traded parties for peace and made a life centered around family. When she was ready, she looked for love again. That's when she met Michel Escoto. On the outside, Michel seemed like a dream, a clean-cut, good-looking guy, charming and always put together. They met while studying at a computer engineering school. Yolanda was steady, practical. Michel was wild-hearted, spontaneous. Different in many ways, yet somehow they fit. They moved in together. Life seemed to settle. Yolanda's daughter grew close to Michel, and for a time, they felt like a real family. But Michel had bigger dreams. He wanted more, status, success, a business of his own. Yolanda believed in him. She encouraged him to pursue his goals. She wanted them to have the future they both talked about, a home, a wedding, stability. When Michel decided that the beauty industry was his ticket, she stood by him. He had some experience with hairdressing and wanted to open his own salon. He enrolled in beauty school in February 2002, hoping to learn what he needed to build his empire. But Michel felt out of place. One of the only men in a class full of vibrant, energetic women, he tried to stand out, but in ways that weren't always good. And behind the scenes, things were beginning to shift. As Michel dove deeper into the beauty industry, the pressure began to mount. He wanted success, but the weight of expectations and his own insecurities started to build. Yolanda was patient, always encouraging, and believed that one day, he would deliver the life they dreamed of. She stood by him as he attended beauty school, hoping that his passion would eventually turn into something bigger. Yet, something was off. While Yolanda focused on their daughter and kept the home steady, Michel began changing in ways she couldn't quite explain. There were whispers about his behavior. Sometimes he'd disappear for days at a time, telling her it was for business. Other times, he'd come home with a look of stress, his eyes dark, his energy off. Yolanda tried to brush it off, but doubt began to creep in. In the summer of 2002, things took a turn. Michel's beauty business dream started to feel more like an obsession. He became more secretive, more intense. He didn't just want a salon, he wanted to control the entire beauty industry. His ambition had become a consuming fire, and Yolanda felt as if she was being slowly pushed out of his world. She had given him her trust, her love, and her unwavering support, but now she was unsure if it was enough to keep them on solid ground. Then, In the middle of one of Michelle's manic plans to expand, Yolanda received a phone call that would change everything. It was late in the evening when the call came. Yolanda was alone in the house with her daughter, trying to juggle the demands of everyday life. The voice on the other end of the line was frantic. Michel had been spotted arguing with someone at a local bar, his anger had exploded in public, and the confrontation turned physical. Michel was arrested. Yolanda rushed to the police station, heart pounding, desperate to make sense of what had just happened. Michel was different now. The man she had known, the man she had loved and built a life with, was slipping away, and she couldn't save him. She tried to visit him in jail, but he refused to see her. No explanations. No remorse. Yolanda was left standing at the edge of the life they had built, unsure whether to leave or try to rebuild the crumbling foundation. What followed was a series of unsettling events. Michel's behavior became more erratic. He was no longer the charming, handsome man she had met at school. He had changed, his temper growing more violent, his desperation more palpable. One evening, Yolanda came home to find Michel waiting for her on the front porch. His eyes were wild, his face drawn with tension. In his hands, he clutched something wrapped in cloth. When she asked him what it was, his response was cold, detached, as though he didn't even recognize her anymore. He told her he had figured it all out. He had found a way to make his business work, to make it all come together. But Yolanda didn't feel relief. She felt fear. That night, after the chilling conversation with Michel, Yolanda couldn't sleep. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. But she didn't know how to stop it. The next morning, Michel was gone. Yolanda waited, thinking it was just another one of his sudden disappearances. But as hours turned to days, her worry grew. When she tried to contact him, there was no answer. The police were called again, but they couldn't find any trace of him. No leads. No signs. Michel had vanished. Weeks passed. Yolanda tried to go on with her life, focusing on her daughter, but the loss of Michel, the man who had once promised her the world, felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. She couldn't let go of the idea that somehow, somewhere, Michel was still out there, caught in the grip of whatever dark force had taken hold of him. And then, a year later, it happened. A body was found. The remains were discovered in a remote area of Miami, buried beneath the overgrowth. It was too decomposed to identify at first, but the clues, Michel's distinctive tattoos, his clothing, confirmed it was him. The story ended just as it had begun, with Yolanda left to pick up the pieces. Her life, once filled with hope and promise, was now shadowed by the tragic loss of the man she had loved, and the haunting question of what had turned him into someone unrecognizable. It was a case that would remain unsolved, leaving behind more questions than answers. What had happened to Michel? What had driven him to the edge? Was it the pressure of his own dreams, the allure of ambition, or something darker, buried deep within him? The mystery would linger in Miami, and Yolanda would forever wonder if she had missed the warning signs, if she could have done more. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, as she sat in her room listening to the sound of her daughter's peaceful breathing, Yolanda would let herself imagine a life where things had turned out differently. A life where Michel hadn't spiraled out of control. A life where they had built the family they dreamed of. But that wasn't the reality she was living. The real story was darker. And the truth, like so many others, was something she would never fully understand. And that, my friends, is the haunting end to the story of Yolanda Sillo. Very interested in Michel, there was something about him, that smooth charm and easy smile, that made him irresistible to those around him. Women, especially, seemed to fall under his spell without much effort on his part. It wasn't just how he looked or how he carried himself, it was the way he spoke, how he listened, how he made each person feel like the only one in the room. Among the many drawn to him was Yolanda, the woman he shared a home with. To the outside world, they seemed like a typical couple, settled, familiar, stable. But Michel was far from committed. Behind Yolanda's back, his gaze had started to wander. And it didn't wander just anywhere, it landed squarely on Wendy Trapaga. Wendy was not like the others. She had a softness to her, a magnetic beauty that seemed almost too delicate for this world. At 21, she carried herself with the grace of a woman twice her age and the glow of someone untouched by cruelty, at least on the surface. Michel noticed her immediately. He didn't hold back his flirtation, often towing the line of what was acceptable, all while keeping Yolanda in the dark. Every night, he returned home to Yolanda, played the role of the loving boyfriend, but something in him had already shifted. Wendy's life had been marked by both beauty and tragedy. She was born on April 29, 1981, the apple of her father Ernest's eye. He was a cargo pilot, often away, but always present in spirit. His returns were like holidays, always bringing gifts, always welcomed with a daughter's wide-eyed joy. That joy shattered on March 31, 1988. Wendy was just 16 when Ernest's plane exploded in the sky, crashing into a stretch of barren land, taking every soul on board with it. He was 61. Wendy's world stopped turning that day. Her heart broke in a way that would never quite heal. Her mother Miriam tried to carry on, raising Wendy as best she could while working as a school administrative assistant. She later remarried, and Wendy found herself surrounded by a new family, step-siblings who cared for her and helped to fill the emotional gaps left behind. But nothing really replaced the bond she had with her father. Wendy was drawn to beauty, maybe because the world had shown her so much ugliness. Fashion, aesthetics, it all became her escape. She had that classic look, long dark hair, soulful brown eyes, and a smile that turned heads. Yet she was grounded, never letting her beauty go to her head. People were drawn to her, not just for how she looked but for how she made them feel, seen, appreciated, safe. After a brief, failed marriage, Wendy redirected her energy. She enrolled in the LaBelle Beauty Academy in Miami, following in the footsteps of relatives who ran salons. It was there she met Michel Escoto. He introduced himself as a tech executive, smooth-talking and self-assured. To Wendy, he was like a lighthouse in a storm. Maybe it was losing her father so young that made her trust older men. Maybe it was just Michel's charm. Either way, she let him in. What she didn't know was that Michel had come to her carrying secrets, big ones. He was still with Yolanda, still playing house, still pretending. But as the days passed, he saw something in Wendy that felt different. It wasn't just desire, it was ease. There were no expectations, no pressure. Just her presence and his lies filling the space between them. Their bond grew, turning from friendship into something more intimate. Michel was careful to keep Yolanda in the dark. But Yolanda wasn't stupid. She began to feel the distance, the shift in tone, the cold silences that used to be filled with warmth. She noticed him pulling away, even if she didn't know why. Michel told himself it was time for a change. In August of 2002, after a tense argument with Yolanda, he made a move. He packed his bags and walked out without a word of closure. Yolanda was stunned. Everything she had envisioned for their future vanished in a matter of minutes. She called, she pleaded, no answer. Desperate, she broke into his voicemail and what she found shattered her, messages from Wendy. Michel hadn't just left her, he had replaced her. Michel and Wendy started fresh in a modest Miami apartment. To outsiders, it might have seemed like young love chasing a dream. But behind closed doors, cracks were already forming. Wendy's mother, Miriam, wasn't sold on Michel. She saw things her daughter didn't, or perhaps refused to. He was older, unpredictable. Too smooth. Too secretive. But Wendy didn't listen. Love, or what she thought was love, had already taken root. And so they lived, in that small space full of new furniture, second-hand dreams, and whispered doubts. A quiet storm was building, one neither of them could see coming. Because when secrets are buried and hearts are betrayed, the past doesn't stay quiet forever. Wendy had always been a quiet, careful soul. The kind of person who saved every receipt, triple-checked the stove before bed, and balanced her checkbook to the penny. So when she introduced Michel to her mother, Miriam, it was impossible not to notice the contrast. He was nearly a decade older than Wendy, still unemployed, and somehow always vague about how he managed to pay for anything. Miriam had her doubts from the start. And it didn't help that Michel didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. He seemed distant, slippery, always with a half-smile and never a full answer. Miriam had tried to ignore her growing discomfort. After all, it was Wendy's life, and all she'd ever wanted was for her daughter to be happy. But little things kept piling up. For one, their apartment was almost completely empty. No furniture to speak of, just two thin mattresses on the floor. Wendy, ever the saver, probably thought it was temporary. But Miriam could tell Michel didn't mind living that way. He wasn't working, wasn't contributing, and didn't seem in any hurry to change the situation. When Miriam gently asked Wendy how they were affording anything at all, Wendy shrugged and said Michel was figuring things out. It didn't sit right. But the biggest red flag came when Wendy announced, seemingly out of nowhere, that they were getting married. She said they were going to do it at City Hall. Just a quick ceremony, legal, simple. No frills, no guests. Miriam tried to reason with her, tried to ask why rush into something so permanent. But Wendy wouldn't budge. That's when she dropped the bombshell: she was pregnant. The wedding took place on October 10, 2002, at Miami Beach City Hall. A few blurry snapshots, a kiss, and it was done. Wendy looked happy, even if Miriam's heart was heavy with worry. Afterward, the newlyweds packed a bag and headed to Key West for a short honeymoon. Just the weekend, they said. A little break to celebrate. Wendy checked in with her mom before they left. She sounded excited. They were staying in a nicer place than expected. Michel had splurged on a suite, surprising her. Wendy said she'd call when they got back Sunday evening. But Sunday came and went with no word. Then early Monday morning, at 5:30 a.m., the phone rang. Miriam jolted awake, heart racing. A call that early was never good news. It was Michel. His voice was low, almost hard to hear. He asked if Wendy was with her. Confused, Miriam said no. Michel paused, then told her they had gone out drinking the night before and gotten into an argument. Wendy had insisted on staying out, despite him being worried about the baby. They argued again in the car, and eventually, he left her outside to cool off. When he returned a few minutes later, she was gone. He claimed he called her, tried to find her, but nothing. Miriam, already uneasy, tried to stay calm. Maybe Wendy needed some space. Maybe she'd call in a few hours. But deep down, she knew, this wasn't like her daughter. At 6 a.m., not far from a warehouse district in northwest Dade County, a sanitation worker was going through his usual routine when something caught his eye. Between two parked cars, someone, was lying still. It was a woman, face down, wearing a blue evening dress. Blood pooled beneath her, thick and dark on the pavement. She had been beaten brutally, her face disfigured, nearly unrecognizable. Blood splattered the car beside her. There was no weapon, no sign of who had done it. But inside her purse, still clutched near her body, was a driver's license. Wendy Trapaga. The news hit Miriam like a truck. She collapsed into sobs, the kind that don't stop. First her husband, now her only daughter. Her world had ended. Detectives moved quickly. They reached out to Michel. He seemed shocked, stammering, barely able to speak. They asked him to come in. At the station, he recounted the same story he told Miriam. How they argued. How Wendy revealed she wasn't actually pregnant during the car ride home. How he had left her to cool off and returned to find her gone. 14 hours of questioning, but something didn't sit right. The story felt too neat. Too rehearsed. Then the autopsy came in. Wendy had been hit at least 15 times with a blunt object. Her skull and facial bones shattered. Her neck showed signs of strangulation. She had alcohol in her system. Traces of sedatives. Whoever killed her didn't just lose control, they wanted her gone. Even more unsettling, the timeline didn't match Michelle's story. Her time of death was estimated between 3 o'clock and 5 a.m., long after Michelle claimed he'd last seen her. And then came the DNA. Foreign material found on Wendy's dress didn't match Michelle, or Wendy. It was someone else. Someone unexpected. Another layer to a puzzle that was only getting darker. Back at the hotel, surveillance footage revealed that Michelle and Wendy had checked in late Friday night. They seemed happy, normal. But no camera ever caught Wendy leaving that hotel alive. Only Michelle was seen later, alone, looking nervous as he came and went from the lobby multiple times. The deeper detectives dug, the more contradictions surfaced. Michelle had told multiple people different versions of the night. That Wendy had walked off in a huff. That he stayed in the hotel the whole time. That maybe she ran away. None of it added up. Wendy had just started her life. Married 3 days. 21 years old. The fairy tale wedding ended in a murder scene behind a warehouse. And the man she married was either holding on to dark secrets, or hiding something even worse. Wendy was found barefoot. That, in itself, didn't raise alarm. But what puzzled investigators was the condition of her feet, clean, unscathed, almost untouched. It was as if she had never walked through the dirt or grass. No scrapes, no bruises. Just clean feet, and a lifeless body. Her hands showed the same strange calm. No defensive wounds, no broken nails, no signs of a struggle. Either she didn't see it coming, or she was in no state to fight back. The autopsy ruled out another theory that had initially made the rounds. Wendy wasn't pregnant. That alone changed the entire narrative. She had told people she was expecting, but that had been a lie. Why? Why fabricate something so personal, so emotionally charged? Investigators started peeling back the layers, and beneath them, they found something much darker than anyone had imagined. At 3:15 a.m. on the day Wendy died, Michelle made a phone call. That detail seemed small at first, people make calls all the time. But it wasn't just any call. It was to his ex-girlfriend, Yolanda. When police tracked her down and told her about Wendy's death, Yolanda broke down. She shared her side of the story. She spoke of love, deep, unwavering love for Michelle. A love that hadn't faded even after he married another woman. Michelle had disappeared from her life, ghosted her without warning, until one day, in the fall of 2002, he suddenly called back. Michelle didn't hold anything back. He admitted to cheating on Wendy, and told Yolanda the affair wasn't just physical, it meant nothing to him. He said he still loved Yolanda. That he always had. That he wanted to be with her again. Blinded by hope, Yolanda believed him. She let herself fall back into his arms, wanting to believe that this time, it would be different. That Michelle was finally hers. But Michelle was living a double life. No solid evidence tied him to Wendy's murder. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage. Not even a weapon. Just whispers and shadows, stories and suspicions. It was as if the crime had been executed with chilling precision, erasing every trace. But then, 2 months after Wendy's death, Michelle did something careless. He tried to cash out her life insurance policy. The payout? $1 million. He was the sole beneficiary. Detectives saw the red flags. What had once seemed like a tragic loss began to reek of premeditation. And as they dug deeper into Michelle's past, something else surfaced. Years before, he'd been arrested. Armed robbery, illegal firearm possession, drugs. A history of crime hidden beneath the surface. 3 years passed. Then detectives circled back to Yolanda. Something about her story didn't sit right. They suspected she knew more than she let on. By then, Michelle and Yolanda were living together again. But it wasn't the romantic reunion Yolanda had dreamed of. Behind closed doors, their relationship had grown toxic, riddled with tension and secrets. When Yolanda sat across from investigators, they didn't play games. They laid out the evidence, every receipt, every timeline. And they warned her. If she lied, the consequences would be hers to bear. The truth began to spill out, piece by piece. Yolanda had paid for Michelle and Wendy's honeymoon. She funded the vacation that would become Wendy's last. Michelle had told Yolanda he was marrying Wendy because Wendy was pregnant. It was a lie, of course. The pregnancy was fake. The love was fake. Everything about his marriage had been part of a larger, colder plan. According to Yolanda, Michelle never loved Wendy. He wanted her gone. And more than that, he wanted her $1 million policy. The plan was simple. Kill Wendy. Collect the money. Start a new life together. Yolanda didn't hesitate. Her love for Michelle clouded her judgment, smothered her conscience. She agreed to help. Michelle tried to carry out the murder during their trip, but something went wrong. Wendy survived the vacation. So he waited. One night, back at their hotel, Michelle slipped something into Wendy's drink. A sedative. She began to drift off, unaware, helpless. As she slipped into unconsciousness, Michelle lifted her into the car. He drove through the night. He arrived at Yolanda's house. She handed over her car, no questions asked. Michelle drove to a remote parking lot, tucked away in northwest Dade. There, Yolanda sat in the car and waited. When Michelle came back, his hands were stained red. A crowbar in his grip. They drove on to Biscayne Bay. The murder weapon was dumped into the water, washed of its secrets. Michelle stripped off his bloody clothes. Back at the house he had once shared with Wendy, he tossed them, one by one, into the trash. But Yolanda's story left one chilling question unanswered. Was she just a witness? Or was she something more? What if Michelle didn't kill Wendy? What if Yolanda had done it herself? The brutality of the murder, the disfigurement, it didn't fit Michelle's usual behavior. And with Yolanda immune from prosecution, thanks to a deal she made, there would never be justice if she was guilty. Michelle's lawyer used this angle in court. He argued that Yolanda had every reason to lie. That she had every opportunity to kill. That Michelle was being framed to protect her. But the jury didn't buy it. After just 2.5 hours of deliberation, they found Michelle Escoto guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Wendy's family sat in the courtroom that day, staring at the man who had stolen their daughter, their sister, their friend. Justice, finally, had arrived. But not in full. Because Yolanda Cirillo still walked free. He was a young woman chasing dreams like any other. College classes by day, yoga sessions in the evenings, and long hours at a local sports store to make ends meet. On top of all that, she found time to work as a nanny, often juggling schedules and barely sleeping, just to stay afloat in the city of Milwaukee. Her name was Kelly, a girl full of ambition and grit, who tried to live life to the fullest despite its challenges. She wasn't all work, though. Kelly had a lively spirit. Her friends often saw her out and about, visiting trendy places, sharing laughs over drinks, and collecting little moments that made life feel rich. A month before things went dark, she met with her father. Everything seemed in place, she had stability, a job she loved, and someone she cared for deeply. His name was Chris Sacco. 38. A sharp, clean-cut IT manager who'd built his life up from the ground. Boston University graduate, classy apartment, a sleek car, a sizable fortune of his own making. From the outside, he was a catch. Her father thought so too, believing Chris was a solid match for his daughter. Chris and Kelly bonded over shared interests, sports, entertainment, fitness. It all looked good on paper. But behind the polished surfaces, things were beginning to fracture. October 12, 2013. Kelly doesn't show up for work. That alone was enough to raise eyebrows. She was known for her reliability. No call, no message. Just silence. Her co-workers reached out, worried. Her phone was off. Her social media accounts inactive. That alone was a red flag. Kelly was glued to her phone like most of us. And now, nothing. It wasn't like her. The people who loved her knew something was wrong. Her family contacted the police. A missing persons report was filed. But there was nothing, no sign of forced entry, no signs of her packing up or leaving town. Her belongings were untouched, as if she had just stepped out for a moment. But she hadn't. And she wouldn't return. As investigators dove into Kelly's life, nothing jumped out. She had no known enemies, no financial troubles, no history of depression. It didn't feel like she left on her own. The police turned their focus toward the last person to see her alive, Chris. He told them he and Kelly spent the night of October 10th together. Drinks at a bar. Laughter. Pizza with friends. Back to his apartment around 2:30 a.m. They had a good time, he said. Then, at 9 a.m., Kelly supposedly left. That was it. They went their separate ways. But something about Chris's story didn't sit right. During questioning, he downplayed their relationship. Said it was casual. Claimed he was in love with someone else and already planning a future with this other woman. It caught detectives off guard. Was this really the same couple Kelly had been telling her friends about? To dig deeper, they spoke to the friends who'd been out with them that night. Everyone said Kelly seemed in good spirits. She talked about her plans for the next day, sleeping in, yoga, laundry. Nothing out of the ordinary. But when they got back to Chris's apartment, the vibe shifted. One friend who joined them for drinks later said there was tension in the room. Chris was chatty, relaxed even. But Kelly looked off, tired, quiet, uneasy. She left soon after, thinking Kelly was just having a bad night. But detectives uncovered more. Conversations with Kelly's close friends painted a different picture of the relationship. Chris wasn't as invested as Kelly was. She cared deeply for him, maybe too much. But he seemed distant, uninterested in commitment. She had even confessed to friends that she feared the relationship was slipping away. Desperate for something to hold on to, she had quietly made a profile on a dating site, not to cheat, but to have a fallback, just in case. And then there were the bruises. Small ones, on her arms and neck. Friends noticed. They asked. She brushed it off, said she bumped into something, made jokes about clumsiness. But the stories didn't add up. The bruises kept showing up. Not all the time, but enough. Enough for people to start whispering that something more sinister might be going on behind closed doors. The investigation intensified. Police got hold of security footage from Chris's building. It showed Chris and Kelly arriving that night, both visibly intoxicated. But there was no footage of Kelly leaving. Chris swore she walked out at 9 a.m., but the cameras didn't agree. She never left. They kept digging. Found out another friend had been there that night too, someone Chris had invited over. This friend admitted they had used drugs together. Illegal ones. Enough to get a search warrant for Chris's apartment. What they found changed everything. The place was a mess of pills, pipes, drug paraphernalia. Chris was arrested on the spot. But what was more disturbing was what came next. In his phone, they found pictures, images of a young woman, unconscious, lying in his bed. And worse, a video. The video showed Chris raping the girl. She appeared limp, unconscious. At some point in the footage, he seemed to strangle her. The girl in the video matched Kelly's description. With this evidence, the case turned from a missing person into something far darker. Detectives brought in a cadaver dog. The dog sniffed around, paused at the bed, and then led officers straight to the bathroom. Whatever happened that night, whatever secrets that apartment held, it was clear now, Kelly didn't walk out of there. She never had the chance. And Chris, well, he wasn't the man everyone thought he was. The dog led them straight to the front door. It didn't bark, didn't growl, just walked with unsettling calm, like it already knew what the police would find. From there, the dog guided officers to the parking lot, then paused by a nearby dumpster. That's when everything began to unravel. Kelly had vanished. No one had heard from her, and no one had seen her since she was last with her boyfriend, Chris. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became, Chris had been the last person to see her alive. Suspicion started to rise like smoke, slow and suffocating. Police suspected that Kelly had been killed, and that Chris had carefully hidden the evidence. According to surveillance footage, or rather, the absence of it, Chris somehow managed to avoid all 28 cameras inside the apartment complex. That suggested premeditation. They believed he spent time with Kelly in his apartment, then moved her body into his car without being seen. But why go to such extremes? And where did he take her? While examining Chris's personal computer, investigators uncovered something horrifying, a stash of child pornography. That discovery led to new charges, separate from the murder case. Still, Chris walked free on bail, as investigators scrambled to find stronger evidence, especially Kelly's body. Without it, any case would be fragile. But Chris's secrets didn't end there. He'd told people he was in a long-term relationship, and it didn't take long for police to track down a woman named Megan, his girlfriend of 3 years. Megan had no idea about Kelly. And Kelly? She had no idea about Megan. When police showed Megan photos from Chris's apartment, something didn't sit right. She noticed things missing. A shower curtain. A rug. Several towels. And a large golf bag, usually kept in the bedroom. It wasn't there anymore. Detectives began to wonder, could Kelly's body have been transported in that bag? As they combed through the building, they found a small side path, a route Chris could have used to reach his car without triggering the surveillance system. Reviewing footage from the parking lot cameras, they spotted him. Chris arrived with the large golf bag, placed it in the trunk at exactly 10:06 a.m. on October 11th. 2 minutes later, Kelly's phone went dark. No more pings. No more signals. Just silence. Over the next 8 hours, Chris made multiple trips between the apartment and his car, loading up with bags and boxes. Then, at 6:16 p.m., he was gone. He didn't come back until the next day. When police asked what he was doing, Chris said he was moving his summer sports gear to his mother's place. But no one believed that. Not really. Especially not Megan, who had been expecting him at 7:30 p.m. He showed up more than an hour late, flustered, and claimed his phone was broken. Megan recalled how odd he seemed, anxious, sweating, jumpy. That night, they stayed at her place. He barely slept. Sweated through the sheets. Couldn't sit still. It was as if someone, was still in the trunk of his car. Investigators believed he was panicking, desperate to find a way to dispose of Kelly's body. On the morning of October 12th, Chris said goodbye to Megan and left. But not before urging her to move with him to Denver. She refused. That same day, police pulled data from his car's GPS system. It showed he'd driven nearly 80 miles out of town to a place called the Cheese House. Chris claimed he went there to buy cheese for his parents and even had a receipt to prove it, time-stamped 9:55 a.m. But why go that far for cheese that could be found at any local store? The police weren't buying it. Something about that trip felt off. They suspected the area near the cheese shop might be where Chris dumped Kelly's body. On his way back, Chris stopped at a sporting goods store and bought a new pair of sneakers. Investigators theorized he'd tossed the old ones, possibly bloodstained, potentially damning, along with other evidence. Everything pointed to meticulous planning. Chris was calculating, maybe even brilliant. But he wasn't perfect. There was a flaw in his timeline. The trip from the cheese house to the sporting goods store should have taken no more than an hour. It took Chris over 2. That unaccounted hour gnawed at detectives. It was long enough to hide a body. But where? The search area spanned nearly 50 miles. Dense forests, empty highways, abandoned fields. The kind of places where you could scream for help and not even the wind would answer. Then came a break. A local out walking stumbled across what looked like human remains in a wooded area, about 37 miles from the city. The police arrived quickly. Dental records confirmed what everyone feared: it was Kelly. The discovery didn't just bring answers. It brought pain. It ended the agonizing unknown that had haunted Kelly's family, but it opened new wounds too. They knew now what had happened to their daughter. The next step was justice. And as the case against Chris grew stronger, piece by chilling piece, one thing became terrifyingly clear: he didn't just try to erase a person, he tried to erase the truth. But no matter how careful, how quiet, or how calculated, some secrets don't stay buried. Not forever. They said she may have been strangled. The medical examiner couldn't say for certain. It wasn't forceful enough to break the hyoid bone. That one small detail left just enough room for doubt. But what they did know was chilling. There was no mess at the scene. No torn curtains. No struggle. No signs of a last-minute panic. Just the skeleton, face down, one arm trapped beneath her. Her legs were curled in such a strange, unnatural way, it looked like she'd been tucked away. Hidden. It wasn't the kind of posture someone ends up in naturally. Investigators believed she'd been placed in something, compressed almost. A golf bag, they suspected. The theory gained weight when footage surfaced. Chris, he was seen carrying a large golf bag into the very area where her remains were found. There was no smoking gun. No bloody weapon. No confession. But something about it all felt off. Chris claimed he was innocent. For years, he said it with conviction. But whispers had started. And those whispers turned into questions. The kind you can't ignore forever. It took 5 long years before charges were even brought. 5 years of Kelly's family living in that dreadful limbo, not knowing what had really happened. When they finally arrested Chris, it wasn't for murder, it was for manslaughter. And for hiding a body. That alone tells you what kind of puzzle the investigators were dealing with. They had theories, but no proof of intent. They believed Kelly and Chris had gotten intimate that night. It started out consensual, but somewhere along the way, things spiraled. Chris had always been drawn to the edge, rough sex, dangerous games. Maybe he didn't mean to kill her. Or maybe he did. But what happened next felt deliberate. Investigators believe he tore down the shower curtain. Ripped it right off the hooks. Took the bathroom rug, the towels, anything that could hold traces of her. He wrapped her body up. Cleaned every surface with surgical precision. Then placed her inside that bag, drove out, and left her. And through all of it, he played the part of a broken man. Claimed he was innocent. Said he didn't know where she went. Cried, even. But then the CCTV footage came in. That bag again. The one he shouldn't have had. A dog trained to detect human remains picked up a scent inside his apartment. Megan, someone close to him, came forward. She said Chris was unrecognizable that day, on edge, late to everything, avoiding eye contact. Then came the ex-girlfriends. Each one with a story. All eerily similar. They said he liked choking. That he didn't know when to stop. That sometimes, they felt like they wouldn't survive it. Still, his defense team held their ground. They said there was no hard evidence. No DNA. No witnesses. No murder weapon. They painted him as a victim of circumstance, a man with a spotless past, a stable job in IT, just trying to move on from a tragedy he didn't cause. There was even a witness. A man who swore he saw a girl who looked like Kelly in another man's car after she was supposedly dead. He'd seen her picture on TV. He couldn't be completely sure, but there was just enough uncertainty to create tension in that courtroom. The defense turned their attention to the dog's reaction, said it wasn't even recorded. Just an officer's interpretation. Subjective. Maybe it wasn't even accurate. Maybe the dog got it wrong. But the prosecution didn't waver. They said the dog's alert was witnessed by several officers. That it wasn't just a hunch, it was procedure. They said Chris had planned it. Cleaned everything too well. Hid too many things. And in the end, the jury agreed. Chris was found guilty, not of murder, but first-degree manslaughter. And for hiding Kelly's body. The sentence was heavy, 31 years behind bars. 26 for what happened to Kelly. 5 more for what he did afterward. But that wasn't all. During a separate trial months earlier, Chris had also been found guilty of possessing child pornography and narcotics. Those charges added 19 more years to his time. In total, he was facing half a century in prison. He's currently serving that sentence at Green Bay Correctional Facility in Wisconsin. He'll be 93 before he's even eligible for parole. In every way that counts, it's a life sentence. Chris didn't accept it quietly. He tried to appeal. But the court stood firm. The sentence held. And just when people thought the dust had finally settled from Kelly's case, another tragedy was waiting in the shadows. This time, the victim was much younger. Her name was Angie Hausman. Angie was born in 1984 in St. Louis, Missouri. Her biological father was never in the picture. By the time she was a toddler, her mother had remarried, and Angie had a little brother she adored. Her stepfather, Ronald, treated her like his own. Their family wasn't perfect, but they were close. Angie was the kind of kid everyone remembered. Outgoing, cheerful, always ready with a smile. She had this way of talking to strangers like she'd known them forever. Her teachers loved her. Her classmates did too. In 1993, Angie was 9 years old and in the 4th grade. She lived in a quiet neighborhood, a place where people left their doors unlocked and waved from their porches. Her school was just a mile away. Close enough that her parents felt safe letting her walk to the bus stop each morning. She wasn't alone. Other kids from the block walked with her, and the adults in the neighborhood watched from their windows. It was a kind of unwritten rule, everyone kept an eye out. Everyone watched out for everyone else's kids. But that November, something went terribly wrong. Angie never came home. And what happened to her would haunt the community forever. On November 18th, Angie went about her usual routine, attending school and finishing her classes by 3 p.m. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, she boarded the bus with a group of neighborhood kids. They made their way to their stop, but as the other children got off, Angie continued on alone. Her stop was just a short walk from there, so it wasn't unusual for her to walk the remaining distance home. But that afternoon, Angie never made it home. It wasn't like Angie to be late, and as the minutes ticked by, her parents began to worry. By 3:30 p.m., they decided to go looking for her, retracing her usual route from the bus stop to their house. As they walked, they spoke to other kids who had gotten off the bus with her. They confirmed that she had been walking toward home, but no one had seen her after that. The neighbors, who usually kept an eye on the children in the area, hadn't noticed anything unusual either. Angie's parents, now frantic, combed the neighborhood, calling her name and asking anyone they could find if they had seen their daughter. As the sky began to darken and the cold set in, they grew more desperate. By nightfall, there was no sign of Angie. With dread hanging in the air, her parents made the difficult decision to call the police. Officers arrived quickly, joining the search for the missing girl. The chilly evening seemed to rule out the idea that Angie had wandered off on her own. The police began to focus on the possibility of something far more sinister, especially given the recent kidnapping of another young girl in the same area. Just 10 days earlier, a man had attempted to abduct an 11-year-old girl right after she got off the bus, dragging her into some bushes before she managed to escape. The man, still at large, became a prime suspect in Angie's disappearance. Police brought in tracking dogs trained to sniff out scents. They picked up Angie's scent near the bus stop and followed it for a while, but then, disturbingly, they lost the trail. The scent had abruptly disappeared, which led the police to believe that Angie might have gotten into a vehicle, further suggesting the possibility of an abduction. Helicopters with thermal sensors were brought in to search the area, and a team scoured the banks of a small stream nearby. But there was still no trace of Angie, no clues that could explain her sudden disappearance. As the search continued into the following day, the authorities reached out to the media, hoping the public could help. News outlets picked up the story, and within 24 hours, the police received over 300 tips. More than 20 additional officers were brought in to help process the growing pile of leads. Despite the overwhelming response, none of these tips brought them closer to finding Angie. Detectives turned their attention to Angie's stepfather. Though he denied any involvement, his position was scrutinized heavily. To clear his name, he agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed, and he urged the police to focus on finding Angie rather than pursuing any suspicions about him. Investigators also tracked down Angie's biological father, who had little to do with her life but had been seen driving past the house several times, watching Angie as she played outside. This behavior raised red flags, but after further investigation, he was ruled out as a suspect, his alibi checked out. By day 3, the FBI joined the case, pooling resources with the local police. They all came to the grim realization that something terrible had happened to Angie. She wouldn't have survived the freezing temperatures on her own. Then, on the morning of day 3, a new lead surfaced. A person reported a suspicious man driving slowly through Angie's neighborhood in a blue sedan. The description matched the one given by the girl who had narrowly escaped the previous abduction attempt. The police created a composite sketch of the suspect and aired it on the news. Flyers with the sketch were distributed across the area, but the man's identity remained elusive. As the case gained national attention, more tips flooded in, some even from psychics claiming to have visions of where Angie might be. One psychic went so far as to name a specific location, a large national park 25 miles away. But detectives were skeptical of these claims, not allowing themselves to be sidetracked by unverified leads. In a bid to generate more information, a reward of $10,000 was offered for anyone who could provide crucial information. This led to an influx of tips, but none that provided any real answers. Meanwhile, detectives uncovered a disturbing conversation from a few days before Angie's disappearance. She had told her teacher she was planning a nature trip with her uncle. But her parents had never heard of any such relative, and it seemed like Angie had invented the story. This raised further suspicions. Could she have known her abductor, someone she might have trusted enough to call uncle? Days passed with no progress. The investigation seemed to stall, and with each passing hour, the chances of finding Angie alive grew slimmer. But on November 27, 9 days after Angie vanished, a hunter called the police with a shocking discovery. He had found a body in the woods of a nearby national park. When officers arrived at the scene, they were met with a horrific sight. A young girl's body was tied to a tree, naked, her head wrapped in tape with only her nose left exposed to the air. Her hands were bound with handcuffs, and near the body, a bag containing personal belongings was found. As the chilling reality set in, the search for answers became even more urgent. Every detail, every clue was now more important than ever.